The principal's office smelled like old coffee and disappointment. 12-year-old Daniel sat in the leather chair, his knuckles still red from the fight, staring at the floor while his father's assistant spoke on the phone in hushed tones. This was the third school in 2 years. The third time someone had made a joke about his mother. The third time he'd lost control. "Mr. Chen is in a board meeting," the assistant said, her voice apologetic. "He'll be here as soon as he can." Daniel didn't respond. He never did anymore. What was the point? His father would show up, write another check, and they'd drive home in silence. That's how it always went. When Richard Chen finally arrived 40 minutes later, he looked exactly like what he was. A man who'd built a tech empire from nothing and had the stress lines to prove it. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His watch definitely did, but his eyes were tired, almost empty, as he shook hands with the principal and listened to the same speech he'd heard twice before. "Daniel is a bright student, Mr. Chen, but he's struggling socially. The other children find him distant, cold even. And today's incident, while provoked, was still violent. We simply can't—" "I understand," Richard cut him off. "We'll make other arrangements." The drive back to their penthouse in Manhattan was quiet except for the city sounds filtering through the car windows. Daniel watched the streets blur past, counting the seconds until they'd arrive home and his father would disappear into his office again. That's what always happened. That's what had been happening since Daniel was old enough to remember. Their apartment took up the entire top floor of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture that no one ever sat on, and a kitchen that rarely got used for actual cooking. Daniel had his own wing, complete with a bedroom bigger than most studio apartments, a gaming room, and a bathroom with a shower that had 6 different settings. He had everything a kid could want, except he didn't want any of it. The nanny quit, Richard said suddenly as they stepped into the elevator. "Mrs. Patterson, she left a note this morning." Daniel shrugged. That made 5 in the past year. They always quit. They'd start out cheerful, trying to connect with him, trying to make him talk about his feelings or his day or whatever. Then they'd realize he wasn't interested in their pity or their forced smiles. Then they'd leave. "I'll find someone else," Richard continued, more to himself than to Daniel. "Someone more qualified. Someone who can handle—" He stopped, the sentence hanging in the air between them. "Someone who can handle you." That's what he meant. Daniel had heard versions of that sentence his entire life. Inside the apartment, Richard went straight to his office. Daniel went to his room. This was their routine. 2 people living in the same space but never really together, like roommates who barely knew each other's names. Later that night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He got up and walked through the quiet apartment, his bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. He passed his father's office and saw the light still on under the door. Of course it was. Richard practically lived in that office, building his company, making his millions, doing everything except being a father. Daniel kept walking until he reached the room no one ever went into. The door was always closed but never locked. He pushed it open slowly. It was his mother's old studio. Richard hadn't changed anything since she died. Her easel still stood by the window. Her paints were arranged on the table exactly as she'd left them 12 years ago. There were unfinished canvases stacked against the wall, sketches pinned to a board, her handwriting on sticky notes reminding herself of color combinations and technique ideas. Daniel had been coming here since he was little, even though he wasn't supposed to. This room was the only place in the entire apartment that felt real. Everything else was just expensive furniture and emptiness. But here, surrounded by his mother's things, he could almost imagine what it would have been like if she'd lived. He picked up one of her sketchbooks and flipped through the pages. Drawings of flowers, city streets, and near the end, sketches of a baby. Him. She'd drawn him before he was born, imagining what he'd look like. There was one sketch labeled "Our Little Boy" with a date 3 weeks before she died. "You shouldn't be in here." Daniel jumped. His father stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, looking older than he had that afternoon. "I know," Daniel said. But he didn't move to leave. Richard stepped into the room slowly, like he was entering a sacred place. Maybe to him it was. He looked around at all the art supplies, the unfinished paintings, the life his wife never got to finish living. "She was excited to meet you," Richard said quietly. "She had everything planned. How she'd teach you to paint, the parks she'd take you to, the stories she'd read before bed. She had this whole vision of what being your mother would be like. It was the most his father had said to him in weeks, Maybe months, but then she died, Daniel said flatly. Because of me. No, Richard's voice was sharp. Don't ever think that. What happened wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault, then why do you hate me? The question came out before Daniel could stop it. All the years of silence, all the loneliness, all the watching his father choose work over him. Every single time, it all came pouring out in those 5 words. Richard looked like he'd been slapped. I don't hate you. You can't even look at me most days, Daniel shot back. You're never here. And when you are here, you're not really here. You'd rather be anywhere else than with me. That's not, Richard started, then stopped. His shoulders sagged. You look like her. You have her eyes, her smile when you used to smile. And yes, sometimes it hurts to look at you and see her. But that doesn't mean I hate you, Daniel. It means I miss her so much it's breaking me. And I never learned how to deal with that and be your father at the same time. It was the most honest thing his father had ever said to him. But it didn't make the loneliness go away. It didn't fill the empty space where a parent should be. I got in a fight today because Tyler Morrison said I probably killed my own mother, and that's why I'm such a freak, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the tears starting to form. And you know what? I didn't even care about the mother comment anymore. I'm used to that. But the freak part? He's right. I am a freak. I don't know how to talk to other kids. I don't have friends. I don't know how to be normal because nobody ever taught me. Richard moved closer and did something he hadn't done in years. He hugged his son, really hugged him, tight and desperate, like he was afraid Daniel might disappear. I'm sorry, Richard whispered. I'm so sorry. I've been a terrible father. I let my grief destroy us both, and you deserved better. You deserve so much better. Daniel stood stiff in his father's arms, not quite knowing how to respond. They'd been strangers for so long that even this moment of connection felt foreign and uncomfortable. When Richard finally let go, he looked determined. Things are going to change. I promise you that. I'm going to find someone who can actually help us, someone who can give you the stability I haven't been able to. And I'm going to do better. Starting now, Daniel wanted to believe him. But he'd learned not to hope for things that never came true. Still, something in his father's eyes looked different. Maybe this time would be different? Maybe. The next morning, Richard canceled all his meetings. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold as he searched through applications for housekeepers, nannies, and caregivers. Daniel watched from the doorway, surprised his father was actually home during business hours. I'm looking for someone different this time, Richard said without looking up. Not just someone to cook and clean, someone who understands what we're dealing with, someone who's been through loss themselves. Why would that matter? Daniel asked. Because maybe we need someone who gets it, someone who won't try to fix us or feel sorry for us, someone who just understands it sounded too good to be true. But Daniel didn't say that out loud. Instead, he grabbed a bowl of cereal and sat down at the table with his father. They ate breakfast together for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. It wasn't much, but it was something, and something was more than they'd had in a very long time. Maria Rodriguez was late for the interview, and that was never a good sign. She rushed through the lobby of the luxury building, her worn sneakers squeaking on the polished marble floor. The doorman looked at her like she'd wandered into the wrong neighborhood, which honestly, she probably had. I'm here for an interview with Mr. Chen, she said, slightly out of breath. Apartment 42A. The doorman checked his tablet and nodded reluctantly. Top floor. Elevator on your right. As the elevator climbed, Maria checked her reflection in the mirrored walls. She tried to look professional, wearing her best blouse and the one pair of dress pants that didn't have a stain. Her daughter Isabella had helped her pick out the outfit that morning before school. You've got this, Mom, Isabella had said, giving her a tight hug. They'd be crazy not to hire you. Maria needed this job. She needed it desperately. Working 3 part-time jobs was killing her. The hospital shifts, the weekend cleaning gigs, the late-night waitressing. She was running herself into the ground trying to keep their tiny Brooklyn apartment and give Isabella a stable life. But it wasn't enough. The bills kept piling up and she was always one emergency away from losing everything. This position, live-in housekeeper for a wealthy family, paid more than all her current jobs combined. The listing had mentioned a guest suite for family members. That meant she and Isabella could actually live somewhere nice, somewhere safe. Isabella could have her own room for the first time since her father died. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Maria stepped out and immediately felt out of place. The apartment was massive, all clean lines and expensive furniture and windows that showed half of Manhattan. This wasn't just rich. This was another world entirely. You must be Ms. Rodriguez. A man in an expensive suit emerged from one of the rooms. He looked tired despite the wealth, with gray at his temples and eyes that suggested he didn't sleep much. Richard Chen, the tech millionaire who'd built an empire. Maria had Googled him before coming. The internet said he was brilliant, driven, and since his wife's death, completely devoted to his work. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Maria started. "The subway had delays." "It's fine," Richard said, waving off her apology. "Please have a seat. Can I get you water, coffee?" "Water would be great, thank you." As Richard went to get water, Maria heard footsteps. A boy appeared from around the corner. 12 years old maybe, with dark hair and eyes that looked much older than they should. He wore expensive clothes but carried himself like someone who didn't care about any of it. The boy stared at her for a long moment, then deliberately walked over to a vase on the side table and knocked it over. It shattered on the floor, pieces scattering across the marble. "Oops," the boy said, his voice flat and emotionless. Maria didn't flinch. She'd been a pediatric nurse before her husband got sick. She'd dealt with scared kids who acted out in worse ways than this. "That was on purpose," she said calmly. The boy's eyes narrowed. "You're going to tell my dad now, right? Get all upset and quit before you even start? Why would I quit over a broken vase? Because everyone does. They come here thinking it'll be easy money, and then they realize I'm not worth the trouble." Richard rushed back into the room with the water, saw the broken vase, and sighed heavily. "Daniel, it's okay," Maria said quickly. "Accidents happen." "That wasn't an accident," Daniel said loudly. "I did it on purpose to make you leave. Because you will leave anyway. They always do. So you might as well go now and save everyone the time." Maria set down her bag and knelt so she was at eye level with the boy. Richard started to say something, but she held up a hand. "You're right," Maria said softly. "People probably do leave, and that must feel awful. Having people constantly walking out of your life makes you wonder if there's something wrong with you, doesn't it?" Daniel's tough expression cracked slightly. "I don't care if they leave. I think you care very much. I think you care so much that you try to make them leave first before they can decide to go on their own. That way you feel like you're in control of it." "You don't know anything about me," Daniel said, but his voice was shaking now. "You're right again. I don't know you, but I know what it's like to lose someone. My husband died 3 years ago. Cancer. And for a long time after, my daughter would push people away too. She'd act mean to her friends, to teachers, to anyone who tried to get close, because she figured if she pushed them away first, it wouldn't hurt as much when they left." Daniel was quiet now, really looking at her for the first time. "But here's what I learned," Maria continued. "Sometimes people leave. Sometimes life takes them away, and it's not fair, and it hurts like nothing else in the world. But that doesn't mean everyone will leave. Some people stay, even when things get hard, even when you push them, even when you break their stuff." She smiled slightly at that last part. "How do you know which ones will stay?" Daniel asked quietly. "You don't. Not at first. You just have to be brave enough to let them try." Richard was watching this exchange with something like wonder on his face. Maria stood up and turned to him. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate the opportunity, but I should be honest with you. I'm not just looking for a job. I have a daughter, Isabella. She's 10. The listing mentioned family accommodations, and that's really important to me. I need to know she'd be welcome here too." "You have a daughter?" Daniel spoke up. "Where is she?" "At school right now. She goes to PS 118 in Brooklyn." "Would she live here too?" Daniel asked, and there was something in his voice that wasn't there before. "Curiosity, maybe. Hope. If your father agrees to hire me, yes. We'd both live in the guest suite." Daniel looked at his father, really looked at him, with an expression that was clearly saying, "Please." Richard seemed surprised by this turn of events. "I think we should continue this conversation in my office, Ms. Rodriguez. Daniel, can you give us a few minutes? Can I meet her daughter?" Daniel asked suddenly. "Isabella?" Maria glanced at Richard, who nodded. "Sure," Maria said. "I pick her up from school at 3. If your dad agrees, maybe we could arrange something." In Richard's office, he got straight to the point. "You're not what I expected. I'm sorry about the vase. The vase doesn't matter. What you did with Daniel, that was remarkable. I've hired 7 different caregivers in the past 2 years. Not one of them knew how to talk to him like that. Most were afraid of him, actually. He's not scary. He's hurting. I know, Richard said quietly, and I haven't known how to help him. I've been so lost in my own grief that I haven't been the father he needs. That stops now, but I need help. I need someone who understands what we're going through. Mr. Chen, I'm going to be very direct with you. I'm a single mother, barely keeping my head above water financially. I need this job, but I also need to know what I'm walking into. Your son has been through trauma. You've both been through trauma. This isn't going to be easy, I know, but you said something to Daniel that stuck with me. About being brave enough to let people try. I think we need to be brave too. Will you take the position? Maria thought about her tiny apartment with the leaky ceiling, about working herself to exhaustion, about how Isabella deserved better. But she also thought about the boy who'd broken a vase to push her away, and the father who clearly loved his son but didn't know how to show it. Yes, she said, but I have conditions. Isabella's education comes first. She stays in her school for now until we figure out what's best for her, and family dinners. If I'm cooking, everyone eats together. No hiding in offices or bedrooms. Richard looked surprised but nodded. Deal. When can you start? I need 2 weeks to handle my current jobs and get Isabella ready for the move. Is that acceptable? That's fine. I'll have the contracts drawn up. They shook hands, and as Maria left the building, she felt both terrified and hopeful. She called Isabella from the subway platform. Guess what, baby? We're moving to Manhattan. Isabella squealed with excitement. You got the job? Really? Really? And there's a boy your age. His name is Daniel. I think you two might become friends. Is he nice? Maria thought about the broken vase and the pain in Daniel's eyes. He's going to be. He just needs to remember how. 2 weeks later, Maria and Isabella stood in the guest suite with their suitcases, looking around at the space that was bigger than their entire Brooklyn apartment had been. Isabella's eyes were huge. Mom, this is like a castle. It's just a nice apartment, honey. No, Mom, this is definitely a castle. There was a knock on the door. Richard stood there with Daniel slightly behind him, looking nervous. Welcome, Richard said. We thought we'd order dinner. Let you settle in. Chinese okay? Isabella walked right up to Daniel. Hi, I'm Isabella. Want to play video games after dinner? Mom says you have a whole game room. Daniel looked startled by her directness. I guess? Cool. Do you like Mario Kart? I'm really good at Mario Kart. My mom is terrible at it, though. I am not terrible, Maria protested. I'm just not very good. That's the same thing, Mom. And just like that, the ice was broken. Over dinner that night, the four of them sat around the table. It was awkward at first, everyone trying to figure out how this new arrangement would work. But Isabella filled the silences with chatter about her school, her friends, her favorite books. Daniel listened, occasionally answering her questions, slowly warming up. Richard caught Maria's eye across the table and 3 months had passed since Maria and Isabella moved into the penthouse, and the changes were subtle but unmistakable. The apartment felt different now. It felt lived in. Daniel had started waiting by the door when Maria came back from grocery shopping, offering to help carry bags. He'd join Isabella in the kitchen when she baked cookies with her mom on Sunday afternoons. At first just watching, then eventually asking questions about measurements and ingredients. He still had bad days, moments where he'd retreat into himself and push everyone away. But those days were becoming less frequent. The biggest change was dinner. Every evening at 7, all four of them sat down together at the table. Maria had made it a non-negotiable rule. No phones, no tablets, no excuses, just food and conversation. Richard had resisted at first, claiming he had calls to make and emails to answer. But Maria had stood firm. The work will still be there after dinner, she'd said. Your son won't always be 12. That had hit home. Now Richard actually left his office at 6:30, helped set the table and asked Daniel about his day. Real questions, not the automatic "how was school" that parents asked without listening to the answer. Tonight, Isabella was excitedly telling everyone about her science project. We're doing ecosystems, and I picked the rainforest because they have poison dart frogs. And poison dart frogs are so cool, they're like tiny little jewels that can kill you. Sounds dangerous, Daniel said, and there was the hint of a smile on his face. A real smile, not the forced ones he used to give. Everything cool is a little dangerous, Isabella replied matter-of-factly. That's what makes it cool. Maria laughed. Where did you learn that philosophy? From Daniel. He said motorcycles are cool because they're dangerous. I never said you should ride motorcycles, Daniel said quickly, looking at Maria with slight panic. Relax, Maria said. She's not getting a motorcycle. Neither are you, for the record. Richard chuckled, and it was such an unfamiliar sound that everyone turned to look at him. He'd been smiling more lately, the permanent tension in his shoulders starting to ease. He was learning to be present, to actually be a father instead of just a provider. After dinner, Daniel surprised everyone by asking Isabella to teach him how to bake. She'd been making chocolate chip cookies every Sunday, and the smell apparently had finally broken down his resistance. Really? Isabella's face lit up. You want to learn? Don't make a big deal about it, Daniel muttered, but he was already washing his hands at the sink. Maria stood back and watched as Isabella explained the recipe with the seriousness of a professional chef. Daniel listened intently, measuring flour and cracking eggs with careful precision. When he accidentally got butter on his shirt, Isabella laughed, and instead of getting angry like he might have months ago, Daniel laughed too. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the sound of his son's laughter. Maria saw his expression, the wonder and relief and something that looked like grief all mixed together. She walked over to him. You okay? She asked quietly. He's happy, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. I haven't heard him laugh like that in years. Maybe ever. He's healing. You both are. Because of you. Maria shook her head. I'm just here. You two are doing the hard work. But they both knew it was more than that. Maria had brought warmth into a cold space. She'd insisted on connection when it would have been easier to keep distance. She'd treated Daniel not as a broken thing to be fixed, but as a kid who needed someone to care. Later that night, after Isabella had gone to bed, Maria found Daniel sitting by the window in his room, looking out at the city lights. Can't sleep? She asked from the doorway. Just thinking. About? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Isabella asked me today if I missed my mom. Not like I'm sorry for your loss, fake sympathy. She actually wanted to know. What did you tell her? I said I don't know how to miss someone I never met. And she said that's probably harder because at least she has memories of her dad. I have nothing. Maria came in and sat on the edge of his bed. You have the studio. All her art, that's something. It's not the same as having a person, no it's not. But Daniel, you know what I think? I think your mom would be proud of you. Of how strong you are, how you're learning to let people in even though it scares you. How can you know that? Because I'm a mom. And if Isabella grew up without me, I'd want her to find people who cared about her. I'd want her to be brave enough to be happy again. I think your mom would want the same for you. Daniel's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. Isabella said you're like a mom to me. Are you? The question caught Maria off guard. She chose her words carefully. I can't replace your mother, Daniel. I would never try to, but I do care about you very much. And I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. He nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. Thanks, Maria. Anytime, kiddo. The next week brought an unexpected challenge. Daniel's new school was having a family project. Each student had to create a presentation about their family tree. It was the kind of assignment that had always sent Daniel into a spiral before, reminding him of everything he didn't have. Maria found him at the kitchen table, staring at a blank poster board with growing frustration. Need help? She offered. This is stupid. I'm just going to tell the teacher I can't do it. Why can't you do it? Because everyone else has normal families and I don't. They'll put their mom and dad and siblings and I'll put what? My dad who's never around? My dead mom I never knew? It's pathetic. Isabella wandered in, saw the blank poster and immediately grabbed markers. You've got me and Mom, that counts. You're not my real family, Daniel said, but there was no bite to it. He sounded more confused than mean. Says who? Isabella challenged. Family doesn't have to be blood. Family is people who show up, people who stay. Daniel looked at the blank poster, then at Isabella and Maria. Something shifted in his expression. Can you help me? I don't really know how to do this. They spent the next 2 hours working on it together. Daniel put his mom at the top, including one of her paintings he'd scanned from the studio. His dad on one branch, and then, after a long hesitation, he added Maria and Isabella on another branch. What should I label this part? He asked, pointing to where he'd drawn them. Isabella didn't hesitate. The people who stay. Daniel wrote it down in careful letters. When Richard came home that night and saw the finished poster, he stood there for a long moment just staring at it. "Is this okay?" Daniel asked, suddenly uncertain. "That I put them on there?" Richard pulled his son into a hug. "It's more than okay. It's perfect." The night before Daniel had to present his project, he got anxious. Maria heard him pacing in his room and knocked softly on the door. "Want to practice your presentation?" she offered. They sat on his floor, and Daniel walked through what he'd say about each person on his family tree. When he got to Maria and Isabella's branch, he stumbled over the words. "I don't know what to say about you guys. Like, how do I explain it? Just tell the truth. Tell them what we mean to you. But what if the other kids think it's weird? Then they think it's weird. But Daniel, you know what's not weird? Caring about people. Letting people care about you. That's the most normal thing in the world." The presentation went better than expected. Daniel stood in front of his class and talked about his mother he never knew, his father who was learning to be present, and the woman and girl who came into their lives and taught them what family really meant. One kid asked, "So is that lady your stepmom?" Daniel thought about it. "No, she's just Maria, and that's enough." When he came home that afternoon, he had a big smile on his face. His teacher had praised his project, calling it honest and brave. Some kids had even come up afterward and said it was cool how he'd defined family his own way. "I'm proud of you," Maria said, ruffling his hair. "Can we celebrate with pizza?" Daniel asked. "Obviously," Isabella chimed in. All major life events require pizza. That night, with pizza boxes spread across the coffee table and a movie playing on the big screen, Maria looked around at this makeshift family they'd created. Richard was actually watching the movie instead of checking his phone. Isabella had her head on Maria's shoulder, and Daniel, for the first time since she'd known him, looked genuinely content. "Hey, Maria," Daniel said during a quiet moment. "Yeah? Thanks for staying. Thanks for letting me." It was a simple exchange, but it meant everything. In the past 3 months, they'd built something real. Not perfect, not without struggles, but real. Daniel was learning to trust. Richard was learning to be present. Isabella had a friend who understood loss. And Maria had found a purpose beyond just surviving. They were becoming a family, not in the traditional sense maybe, but in the way that mattered most. They showed up for each other. They stayed. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, certified mail that required Maria's signature. She knew before opening it that something was wrong. Official documents never brought good news. Inside was a notice of eviction from her Brooklyn apartment. The building had been sold to developers and all tenants had 60 days to vacate. Maria's hands shook as she read the details. She'd been subletting from her cousin after her husband died, trying to keep that apartment as a safety net, a backup plan. She'd been paying rent on a place she no longer lived in, just to have somewhere to go if this arrangement with the Chens fell apart. Now that safety net was gone, and the timing couldn't be worse. The letter also mentioned that because she'd been subletting without the landlord's knowledge, she could face legal complications. Her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Her late husband's sister, Patricia, had been waiting for Maria to slip up, waiting for any excuse to claim Maria couldn't provide for Isabella. Patricia had money, a big house in Connecticut, and a lawyer on retainer. She'd made it clear that she thought Isabella would be better off with her. "That child needs stability," Patricia always said, looking down at Maria's worn clothes and tired eyes. "Not a mother who works herself to death." Maria had managed to keep things together barely, but this eviction notice could be the ammunition Patricia needed. She was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the letter, when Daniel came home from school. He took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" He asked. "Nothing, sweetie. Just some paperwork." But Daniel had learned to read people over the past few months. He'd learned to recognize when someone was hurting. "That's not nothing. You look really upset." Before Maria could answer, her phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. Maria's stomach dropped. "I need to take this," she said, walking to her room and closing the door. Daniel stood outside the door, not quite eavesdropping, but close enough to hear Maria's raised voice. She was usually so calm, so patient. Hearing her argue with someone was jarring. When she emerged 15 minutes later, her eyes were red. "Maria, what's going on?" Daniel pressed. "It's complicated, honey." "I'm not a little kid. You can tell me." Maria sat down heavily on the couch. Daniel sat next to her, waiting. Isabella was at a friend's house for a study session, so it was just the two of them. My late husband's sister is trying to get custody of Isabella, Maria finally said. She's been looking for reasons to claim I'm an unfit mother, and today I found out I'm being evicted from my old apartment, which I probably shouldn't have been subletting anyway. And it's all just a mess. But you live here now. Why does your old apartment matter? Because it was my backup plan. If this arrangement didn't work out, Isabella and I had somewhere to go. Now we don't. And Patricia's lawyers can argue that I'm unstable, that I don't have a permanent home, that I'm living on someone else's charity. But Dad pays you. You work here, I know. But on paper, it looks like I'm dependent on your father's generosity. Patricia will twist it to make me look bad. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Can't Dad help? He has lawyers, right? Daniel, your father has already done so much for us. I can't ask him to get involved in my legal problems. That's not fair to him or to you. But you help us all the time. You helped me when everyone else gave up. That's different. Why? Maria didn't have a good answer for that. The truth was she was terrified of asking for help, of seeming weak or needy. She'd been taking care of herself and Isabella for 3 years. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat. I'll figure it out, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. But Daniel had already made up his mind about something. When his father came home that evening, Daniel was waiting for him in his office. We need to talk, Daniel said, closing the door behind him. Richard looked up from his computer, surprised. Is everything okay? No. Maria's in trouble and we need to help her. Daniel explained everything he'd overheard and what Maria had told him. As he talked, Richard's expression grew more serious. Why didn't she come to me? Richard asked. Because she doesn't want to ask for help. But Dad, she's always helping us. She's the reason you and I actually talk now. She's the reason I don't hate everyone anymore. And if she loses Isabella, it'll destroy her. Richard had never heard his son speak with such passion about another person's well-being. The change in Daniel was remarkable. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have cared about anyone's problems but his own. You're right, Richard said. We need to help her. Let me make some calls. There's something else, Daniel said, and his voice shook a little. What if we lose them? What if Maria has to leave because of all this? I can't, he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Richard pulled his son into a hug. We're not going to lose them. I promise you that. Over the next few days, things got worse before they got better. Patricia filed for emergency custody, claiming Maria was neglecting Isabella by working long hours. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Maria worked hard to provide for her daughter, and now that dedication was being used against her. A court date was set for 2 weeks away. Maria tried to keep things normal for Isabella's sake, but the stress was eating her alive. She barely slept, barely ate, spent every spare moment on the phone with her court-appointed lawyer who seemed overwhelmed and underprepared. Daniel watched Maria deteriorate. She stopped smiling. She stopped joining them for movie nights. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, present but not really there. One night, Daniel found her crying in the kitchen at 2 a.m. She tried to hide it when she saw him, but it was too late. Sorry, honey. Did I wake you? Can't sleep, Daniel said. He sat down across from her. Are you going to be okay? I have to be. For Isabella. But what if you're not? What if the judge says you can't keep her? Maria's face crumpled. Then I don't know what I'll do. She's everything to me. I've spent 3 years trying to give her a good life. And now it might all be taken away because I couldn't provide enough. Because I wasn't enough. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Something he never would have done 6 months ago. You are enough. You're the best mom I've ever seen. I mean, I never had one, but if I did, I'd want her to be like you. Maria squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know. I'm going to help. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help. The next morning, Daniel did something he'd never done before. He went to his father's office during work hours, walked past his assistant, and knocked on the door. Daniel? Richard was in the middle of a video call. Is everything okay? I need you to stop working and listen to me. It's important. Richard ended his call without hesitation. I'm listening. Maria might lose Isabella. And if she loses Isabella, she'll have to leave. Because there's no reason for her to stay here without her daughter. And I can't lose her too, Dad. I can't lose another person I care about. Please, you have to do something. It was the most vulnerable Daniel had been since his mother died. He was asking for help, truly asking, admitting he needed someone. Richard came around his desk and knelt in front of his son. I've already called my lawyers. We're going to help her fight this. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. Even if things don't go the way we hope, Maria won't just disappear from your life. We'll make sure of that. How can you promise that? Because she's family now. Maybe not in the traditional way, but she is. And we don't abandon family. Daniel nodded, wanting desperately to believe it. Over the next week, Richard's legal team got involved. They gathered evidence of Maria's excellent care for Isabella, statements from Isabella's teachers and friends' parents, documentation of everything she'd done to provide for her daughter. But Patricia's lawyers were good too. They painted Maria as an unstable woman who'd latched onto a wealthy family, who'd abandoned her own home and was now living off Richard Chen's charity. They suggested her judgment was impaired by grief and financial desperation. The night before the custody hearing, the whole household was tense. Isabella knew something was wrong, though Maria had tried to shield her from the details. She clung to her mother more than usual, as if sensing the threat to their little family. Whatever happens tomorrow, Maria told her daughter at bedtime, I love you more than anything in the world. Remember that. Why are you talking like something bad is going to happen? Isabella asked, her voice small and scared. I'm just making sure you know. After Isabella fell asleep, Maria sat in the living room with Richard and Daniel. They'd become a unit over these months, a strange but genuine family. The thought of it ending was unbearable. I wrote something, Daniel said suddenly. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. For the judge. I want to read it tomorrow. Daniel, you don't have to do that, Maria said. Yes, I do. You showed up for me when no one else could. Now I'm showing up for you. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and stress. Maria sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Richard sat on one side of her, Daniel on the other. Isabella was inside with a court-appointed guardian who'd been assigned to speak with her privately. Patricia arrived with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man carrying an expensive briefcase. She looked at Maria with something between pity and contempt. This doesn't have to be difficult, Patricia said, approaching them. Isabella needs stability. A proper home. I can give her that. She has a proper home, Maria said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. With me. Living in someone else's apartment? Dependent on the charity of your employer? That's not stability, Maria. That's desperation. Richard stood up. Ms. Torres, I think it's best if we save this conversation for the courtroom. Patricia's eyes narrowed. And you are? Richard Chen, Maria's employer and friend. How convenient that she has such a wealthy friend. Makes one wonder what else is going on here. The insinuation was clear and insulting. Daniel jumped to his feet, ready to defend Maria, but she put a calming hand on his arm. Let it go, she whispered. She's trying to get a reaction. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began. Patricia's lawyer went first, laying out their case. He painted Maria as well-intentioned but overwhelmed. A woman who'd been forced by circumstances to essentially give up her own home to live with strangers. He suggested Isabella was being exposed to an unstable environment, living with people she barely knew, without the structure and security of a traditional family home. My client can provide Isabella with her own room, in a permanent home, in an excellent school district. She'll have cousins to play with, a stable routine, and most importantly, she won't be dependent on the whims of an employer who could end this arrangement at any moment. Maria's lawyer countered with evidence of her devotion to Isabella. Teachers testified that Isabella was thriving, happy, well-adjusted. Friends' parents spoke about what a caring, attentive mother Maria was, but Patricia's lawyer was skilled at poking holes in everything. And where exactly do you live, Ms. Rodriguez? He asked during cross-examination. I live at 847 Park Avenue in Manhattan. But that's not your residence, is it? That's your employer's residence where you're provided staff housing. What happens if Mr. Chen decides he no longer needs your services? Where will you and Isabella go? Maria hesitated, and that hesitation was damaging. I would find other arrangements. But you don't currently have other arrangements, do you? In fact, you were just evicted from your previous apartment for unauthorized subletting. I was still paying rent on an illegal sublet while living elsewhere. That doesn't demonstrate stability, Ms. Rodriguez. It demonstrates poor judgment. Maria felt the case slipping away from her. She looked at Isabella sitting with the guardian and saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. Then Richard's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Richard Chen to the stand." Richard walked up calmly and was sworn in. Maria's lawyer had briefed him, but seeing him there, about to speak on her behalf, made her throat tight with emotion. "Mr. Chen, can you describe Maria Rodriguez's role in your household?" "Maria is employed as our household manager, but she's become much more than that. She's helped my son and me rebuild our relationship after years of grief and disconnection. She's brought warmth and stability to our home. And her living arrangement, is that typical for household staff? Many live-in employees receive housing as part of their compensation package. Maria's situation is no different, except that I consider her family." Patricia's lawyer jumped in.
"Family? That's a convenient claim, Mr. Chen. How long have you known Ms. Rodriguez?"
7 months. "And in that time, she's convinced you she's family? Sir, with all respect, it sounds like Ms. Rodriguez has taken advantage of your generosity and your son's emotional vulnerability." Richard's jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen? Please explain to the court why a millionaire CEO would consider his housekeeper family after only 7 months." Richard looked directly at the judge. "Because she gave me my son back. When Maria came into our lives, Daniel was angry, isolated, and pushing everyone away. I'd failed him as a father. I was so consumed by my own grief over losing my wife that I abandoned my son emotionally. Maria didn't just take care of our home. She taught us how to be a family again. She showed us that caring about people isn't a weakness, that letting people in is worth the risk. And my son, who hadn't smiled in years, started laughing again, started trusting again. That's not taking advantage. That's saving us." The courtroom was quiet. Even Patricia's lawyer seemed momentarily thrown. "Your Honor," Richard continued, "I'd like to offer something for the record. I'm prepared to purchase a home for Maria and Isabella, completely separate from my residence, in Maria's name with no strings attached. She'll have permanent housing regardless of her employment status with me. I'm also willing to establish a trust fund for Isabella's education. These aren't conditional offers. They're gifts to people who've become important to my family." Patricia's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to buy the court's favor." "I'm not trying to buy anything," Richard interrupted. "I'm trying to ensure that a good mother isn't separated from her daughter because of money. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Money. Patricia Torres has money and Maria doesn't, so somehow that makes Patricia the better guardian. But money doesn't make you a parent. Love does, showing up does. Being there when your kid needs you does. And Maria does all of that every single day." The judge made a note and then asked, "Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?" Daniel stood up in the gallery. "I do." Maria turned around surprised. They'd discussed this, but she'd told him he didn't have to if he wasn't comfortable. "Your Honor, I'm Daniel Chen. I know I'm not part of this case officially, but I wrote something I'd like to read if that's okay." The judge looked at both lawyers, who nodded. "Go ahead, young man." Daniel walked forward, his hands shaking slightly as he held his paper. He looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. "I don't have a mom," Daniel began, his voice quiet but steady. "My mom died when I was born. And for my whole life, I've watched other kids with their mothers and felt like something was missing, like there was this hole inside me that would never get filled. I was angry all the time. I pushed people away because it hurt less than letting them get close and then watching them leave." He paused, taking a breath. "Then Maria came to live with us, and at first I tried to make her leave like everyone else. I broke stuff, I was rude, I did everything I could to push her away. But she didn't leave. She stayed. And she showed me what it means when someone cares about you, not because they're paid to, not because they have to, but because they choose to." Isabella was crying now. Maria was too. "I've watched Maria with Isabella every single day for 7 months. I've seen how she helps with homework even when she's exhausted, how she makes Isabella's favorite breakfast on hard days, how she listens, really listens when Isabella talks, how she puts her daughter first always. And I've also seen Isabella. She's happy. She's confident. She knows she's loved. That's because of her mom." Daniel looked directly at the judge. Patricia Torres might have a big house and money, but Maria has something more important. She has Isabella's heart, and taking Isabella away from her mom would break them both. I know what it's like to grow up without a mother. It's the hardest thing in the world. But what's worse than not having a mother is having one taken away from you when she's right there. loving you, doing everything she can for you. Please don't do that to Isabella. Please let her stay with her mom." He folded the paper and sat back down. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Maria's quiet crying. The judge asked to speak with Isabella privately in her chambers. 20 agonizing minutes passed. When they returned, the judge sat down and reviewed her notes. "I've heard testimony from both sides," she began. "Ms. Torres, you've presented a compelling case for stability and resources. But this court's primary concern is the child's best interest, not just material comfort. Isabella has been clear and consistent in expressing her desire to remain with her mother. She's thriving academically and socially. The concerns about housing instability have been addressed by Mr. Chen's generous offer, which I'm noting for the record is genuinely charitable and not coercive." Patricia leaned forward, her face tight. "More importantly," the judge continued, "I've seen no evidence of neglect or unfitness. What I see is a hard-working single mother doing her absolute best for her child in difficult circumstances. Financial struggle does not equal bad parenting. The petition for custody is denied. Isabella will remain with her mother." Maria collapsed into sobs, Richard's hand on her shoulder. Daniel was grinning so widely his face hurt. Isabella ran from the guardian straight into her mother's arms. Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're making a mistake." "The hearing is concluded," the judge said firmly. "My decision is final." Outside the courthouse, Maria couldn't stop crying. Happy tears this time, relief flooding through her entire body. "Thank you," she said to Richard over and over. "Thank you so much. You don't have to thank me. We're family."